BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. On Mondays I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer from California who operated in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And the first thing that I would like to talk to you guys about is there is a Zodiac Killer documentary that is available on the channel, The American Story U.S. History. And the full title that you can hear and find on YouTube is Zodiac, Inside the 50-Year Hunt for America's Most Elusive Serial Killer. And I'm just going to be referring to this as The American Story Documentary. And this is one that really wanted to tell the backstory of the Zodiac Killer. And the Zodiac Killer, of course, had his first confirmed murder on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. Then there was the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th of 1969, and that saw the death of one person, Darlene Ferrin, and there was a survivor in that crime, Mike Michaud. And then there was the Lake Berryessa stabbing on September 27th of 1969, which saw the death of Cecilia Shepard, but there was another survivor in that one, Brian Hartnell. And then the final confirmed crime that has been attributed to the Zodiac Killer, or the final confirmed murder, I should say, is the murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver, which occurred on October 11th of 1969. Now, this documentary was trying to take a very strong stance by saying that after the murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver, the Zodiac Killer would write a letter that was stating that he was going to disguise his crimes as routine robberies and accidents, and he also said things like school children make nice targets, and that he was going to detonate a bomb. The Zodiac was making lots of threats, and he terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area. You will find that very clearly in a lot of Zodiac-related documentaries and episodes. The Zodiac Killer terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area, even going back to the America's Most Wanted episode that it has introduced so many people to the Zodiac story, myself included. That's one of the first memories that I have of the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area. And they really tried to make it look like the Zodiac Killer was doing this after the murder of Paul Stine. So the Zodiac is committing murders, and then he is turning himself into a type of domestic terrorist. And I don't think that's a fair thing to say. In fact, I don't think that's an appropriate thing to say at all, because the Zodiac Killer did this from the very beginning. I mean, the very beginning of his debut. Because the Zodiac would commit the Lake Herman Road murders on December 20th, which saw the deaths of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. And it was not until the second crime, and after the second crime, that the Zodiac Killer would start writing letters and ciphers. And in these early letters and ciphers, the Zodiac Killer is openly saying that if you don't print this on the front page, I'm going to go on a kill rampage. This is in the summer of 1969, so that means that the Zodiac has already tried to terrorize the Bay Area. The Zodiac is already turning himself into a terrorist from the debut of the Zodiac persona. And very simply, I think that that's where it stands. The Zodiac was always a domestic terrorist. Some people think I bring that up too much. Other people think that I don't bring that up enough. But I do have to give credit to the American Story documentary for pointing that out, that the Zodiac was very evolutionary. The Zodiac was a serial killer who definitely tried to do different things. For example, the threat to detonate a bomb, the threat to target school children, the threat to disguise his crimes as routine robberies, and he's not going to announce his murders to the world. I mean, the Zodiac was all about evolution and changing the way that he was committing these crimes. And that's one of the reasons why the Zodiac Killer did not get caught, amongst others, which I'll be talking about throughout the duration of this recording. And as we continue onward, I would like to remind you guys that you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also drop something in the comment section below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. I'm really curious to know what you guys think about any of these things. I'm going to be going through a couple other comments here on Zodiac Monday. But for the next segment here, continuing with the American Story documentary, they zoned in on the Zodiac Killer's codes very closely. Because the Zodiac Killer didn't only write letters taking credit for his crimes, he also designed the very famous ciphers. And in fact, some of the most famous things that have been attributed to the Zodiac Killer are the ciphers. And when a lot of people in the general public might think about the Zodiac Killer, they might think about the Zodiac Killer symbol, and they might think about the Zodiac ciphers even before the crimes that he committed. Once again, in the general public, talking about people who wouldn't follow the Zodiac Killer mystery closely. But with the ciphers, there first is the 408 cipher that was solved by Don and Betty Hardin, and this was sent in 3 segments after July 31st of 1969. Then there was the 340 cipher, and this documentary, The American Story, told the whole backstory of how the 340 cipher was solved in 2020, and this had 340 characters. The first one had 408 characters. Then we have the Z13, and this cipher has never been solved. And then there's the Z32 cipher, which came after that. Both of those were mailed in 1970. And this has also never been solved. And this is the point that I want to get to. This is a takeaway from the American Story documentary. They made a bold statement. And I don't know if some people are going to like this, but what they said was, the reason why those ciphers have not been solved is, it's impossible. It's impossible. And they're talking about how it's not possible to determine the exact solution that was created by the Zodiac Killer, maybe without some type of additional information. And I really don't want to accept that. Maybe it's just the inner sleuth in me that is just pushing back, but I don't want to accept that the Z13 and Z32 ciphers are not solvable and that it's impossible to get a direct solution. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think it might even require some type of outside and additional information. But I would also like to know what you guys think. Do you think it is possible to solve the Z13 and the Z32 ciphers? But I also want to look at one of the comments that was left on the American Story Zodiac Killer documentary. And this one just says, this is just the first comment that happened to be there. And it says, within 2 minutes, you placed the first Zodiac murder in San Francisco when it actually occurred in Benicia, 36 miles away. My hopes are low. And this is talking about low hopes for the documentary, thinking that it's not going to be a good episode. And with the Zodiac Killer crimes, they're often referred to as occurring in the San Francisco Bay Area. But I just want to point out that the first murders at Lake Herman Road were not actually in Benicia, California. If I understand correctly, they were on unincorporated land between Benicia and Vallejo. And I want to look at some of the points here that were left in response to that, because, you know, on YouTube, when someone leaves a comment, it turns into a comment thread. And I just want to look at one that was actually left by Roland Tomasi. I could only expect that that's an allusion to LA Confidential and Rollo Tomasi, the character slash figure slash idea, but it says, it sounds like the Zodiac Killer was an ex-boyfriend. And I always love when people leave their feedback, when people leave their insights, and we can try and discuss this. Okay, well, we're going to be talking about the Lake Herman Road murders. Well, the victims at Lake Herman Road were David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. David Faraday was 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen was 16 years old. So if the Zodiac Killer were hypothetically Betty Lou Jensen's ex-boyfriend, how old of a killer are we going to be talking about? Yeah, this might work if you have a suspect like Louis Myers or George Senda, who was only 17 years old at the time. Joseph Paul Franklin is another very young Zodiac Killer suspect. He was 18 years old at the time. And from time to time, people are going to pull up people in their early 20s, like 20 years old, 21 years old. Maybe, theoretically, mathematically, it's not completely out of reach. And, I mean, I don't think that Betty Lou Jensen was having an affair with George Hill Hodel or something like that, a Zodiac Killer suspect in his 60s. Absolutely not. I mean, at the very least, I don't think there's evidence to support that. But I'm going to come back to this thing later on about the ex-boyfriend angle. And somebody just completely wanted to challenge this comment from Roland Tomasi by saying, nah, sounds more like he was never anyone's ex, because he was never anyone's current, and I'll bet that was a major part of his problem. He was compensating on his terms. This is something that is widely believed, not only about the Zodiac Killer, but also about other lovers' lane murderers, about how they're just people who are denied access to relationships, where they feel that they are unable to form relationships, they are rejected from society, or at the very least, they believe they are rejected. They feel that they are not able to have romantic partners. They don't know how to go about dating. So this type of sexual frustration manifests itself into some very destructive tendencies. And we see this very frequently in the 21st century when we're looking at stories of killers who are identifying as incels. And it's possible that the Zodiac Killer was like that. I mean, it is possible, but you could make a case for and against this, that the Zodiac was married with children and he's just getting away from his family life when he's committing the murders. And you can also make the case that the Zodiac was what Ray Grant would call the sad, lonely man, the sad little man, who just never had any access to partners because that's why he was committing the crimes. I mean, I think that there is a case that you can make for either one, and I don't mean to be someone who's completely on the fence, so I'm going to take a very strong stance. Throughout all of my observations in the true crime world, and throughout all of these explorations of Black Box Online Radio, I have found that these types of patterns are not predictive factors. These types of patterns do not form in concrete ways. It's not like you can just say, oh, somebody was committing lovers' lane murders, therefore they were an incel, therefore they were an involuntary celibate. And you can also not just say, well, someone was committing lovers' lane murders, and that was because they were getting away from their wife and kids. Serial killers and criminals do not follow these guidelines. They don't just fit into these types of boxes and you can't compartmentalize them. Human behavior is way too vast for that. And here's something else I think is also very, very important. These things that people say about patterns of serial killer behaviors, there are so many exceptions to that. There are so many exceptions that prove the rule. I mean, that disprove the rule. Like, I mean, it's really just something that is going to be completely all up and down and across the spectrum. So I'm not even convinced in any particular direction that the Zodiac Killer was an incel or he was married. And most importantly, I just want to be clear that these things about serial killer behaviors following a certain pattern of activities is mostly nonsense, in my opinion. And one more time, if you would like to hear the full episode and watch the full episode that I've just been discussing, it is on the channel The American Story, U.S. History, and the title is Zodiac, Inside the 50-Year-Old Hunt for America's Most Elusive Serial Killer. And last week on the channel, I was talking to you guys about Eddie McNamara and his two books, Brooklyn Hardcore, and the new book that he has put out, Too Fair Zone. And Eddie has been a guest on this channel in the past talking about the Zodiac Killer, and Eddie has made a page on BigCartel.com. You can find it under brooklynhardcore.bigcartel.com, and it features the two books, Brooklyn Hardcore and Too Fair Zone, the new set of stories that was written by Eddie McNamara. And I want to spend a very large portion of this episode talking about something that I've never discussed before on Zodiac Monday, and something that I am a relative newcomer to. I would like to give a shout out to Quentin Broom, who sent this to the email address, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. That's how you can get in touch with me, Box Ned, your host of Zodiac Monday. And this relates to the Circleville Letters. And I've been asked before this question, and it is, do you think the Zodiac Killer wrote the Circleville Letters? Do you think the Zodiac Killer had any role at all with the Circleville Letters? And again, I'm somewhat of a newcomer to this story, but let's go through some of this here. And Quentin Broom specifically sent me a live stream that was done by Pat Brown. Pat Brown is a psychological profiler. She's the author of the book The Profiler. I talk about her material all the time. And she is somebody whom I like the way she thinks. I like the way that she arranges information, even if I disagree with a lot of her observations, even if I'm not convinced by her observations, even if I find certain conflicts between her personality and mine. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I want to be very, very honest about this. I watched about 20 minutes of her live stream on the Circleville Letters, and I thought, whoa, I'm a newcomer to this story. I'm definitely going to have to watch something that's a little bit more general. She's really getting into the nitty-gritty, and I'm still trying to digest the basic facts. And I also will be very honest, this was one of her most annoying broadcasts to date. As I said, her personality does not always go in with mine in a coinciding way. And that's sometimes why I watch people who have different opinions, who have different types of thought processes. I want to know how different people think. And I think that makes us genuinely curious about these types of unsolved mysteries. A lot of you guys are probably like that, but this episode that she had released on the Circleville Letters was annoying. And that one of the reasons why I would say that about somebody like Pat Brown is she can be assumptive at certain times, and she can also be very dismissive at certain times. But I think my issue was more just with the presentation style. Although I loved her episode about the Zodiac Killer, I loved her episode about Jack the Ripper, I loved her episode about the Freeway Phantom, and I invite you guys to check those out, even if I didn't agree with all her observations. Those I thought were very well done on her YouTube channel. But I decided to watch something a little bit more general, so I went over to 48 Hours on YouTube. 48 Hours, the true crime show that's hosted by Erin Moriarty. And I was very pleased to see that they also did a recent re-upload of the Bugs Bunny defense, which is one that I saw, goodness, maybe 13, 14 years ago. I saw that on YouTube, 48 Hours of the Bugs Bunny defense. That's absolutely not Zodiac Killer related, but if you're interested in different types of true crime, I would recommend it because that is one of the best episodes of 48 Hours that I have ever seen. And that's all about how a woman claimed that she was reenacting a scene from Looney Tunes, and she accidentally killed her husband. And she was claiming the Bugs Bunny defense, where she was actually trying to pretend to be Elmer Fudd, and he was Bugs Bunny, and she shot him. But Elmer Fudd isn't even allowed to carry a gun anymore. He's carrying a scythe, which is a little bit weird because it's not exactly going to be any less violent. It's just a different mechanism that's going on there, but I digress from that. But let's talk about the Circleville Letters. I watched the episode that was presented by Erin Moriarty, and the Circleville Letters were mailed from Columbus, Ohio, actually, to a place called Circleville, Ohio. And one thing that I did not know was that Erin Moriarty was a native of Columbus, Ohio, so she had a personal connection to this particular story. And to help us out, we're going to go over to an article from ATI called Inside the Eerie Mystery of the Circleville Letters That Terrorized an Ohio Town for Nearly 20 Years. So, as we see, already the Zodiac is terrorizing the Bay Area, and the Circleville Letters, which are going to start in 1977, are terrorizing a town in Ohio. This was written by Genevieve Carlton and John Karosky, just citing the source. Starting in the late 1970s, the anonymous Circleville Letters were sent to hundreds of local residents, businesses, and government offices, and others, threatening to reveal the recipient's darkest secrets or worse. And one of them says, "I've been observing your house," read the anonymous letter that was sent to a woman named Mary Gillespie in 1977. "I know you have children." Now, this is halfway in and halfway out because, firstly, the Zodiac Killer is not so much of a stalker of specific people. The Zodiac is trying to broadcast his message out there. But the Zodiac Killer did give away certain clues about specific people, and a prime example of this is when the Zodiac Killer was talking about how he committed the abduction of Kathleen Johns. Now, the abduction of Kathleen Johns occurred on March 22nd of 1970 when a woman was told that her back wheel was wobbling on Highway Route 132 in California, and the Zodiac allegedly sabotaged her car as a ruse to get her into the vehicle and drove around with her for like 2 hours or something. But, I don't think the Kathleen Johns incident was Zodiac activity. But the Zodiac did write a follow-up letter stating that, "I gave an interesting ride to a woman and her baby a few months back." So the Zodiac does mention specific people, but here's something that is a little bit different than the Zodiac's crimes. I'm going to keep reading the full text of the letter, and it is divided into two parts here on ATI. "I've been observing your house and read the anonymous letters Mary Gillespie received in 1977. I know you have children." And the next line is, "Stay away from Massey." And he was actually an individual named Gordon Massey, who was a school superintendent. And the woman, Mary Gillespie, who received the letter, wasn't the only one receiving threatening letters. And back to the article. "Across Circleville, Ohio, residents found anonymous letters in their mailboxes, and so did elected officials and local papers. But what did the Circleville Letters want, and how far would the letter writer go? Then a letter was sent to Ron Gillespie. Not long after Mary Gillespie received a letter exposing her affair with Gordon Massey, her husband Ron began getting mail of his own and saying, "Mr. Gillespie, your wife is seeing Gordon Massey." One of the Circleville letters read, "You should catch them together and kill them both. He doesn't deserve to live." Now, there are some similarities in the handwriting to that of the Zodiac, and I'm particularly reminded about some of the communications that happened in the 1970s. Like last week, I was talking about the Zodiac's Albany letter, but there's also the 1981 Atlanta letter, which is talking about how the Zodiac is intentionally disguising his handwriting, and we see this all capital shift. And even in the 1990 Eureka card, the Zodiac allegedly in this unconfirmed communication was writing in all caps with a slant to the right, and these Circleville letters are written in all caps and a slant to the right. But you might be noticing something that is very immediate about this that seems a little bit different, and that is that this isn't really threatening to go on a kill rampage. This isn't threatening to detonate a bomb. This isn't threatening to commit mass murder. What this letter is doing is just trying to expose somebody for having an affair. And my immediate reaction was, the Zodiac Killer of the 1960s probably wouldn't have cared at all if somebody was having an affair, or at the very least, he might not have called them out by name. I mean, you would really have to expect that there was some type of change in the Zodiac Killer's MO. But remember what I said at the beginning. The Zodiac Killer was an evolutionary serial killer. The Zodiac Killer was the type of person who was frequently changing the way that he would go about committing these crimes. Now let's keep on reading here. The small town of Circleville, Ohio, a half hour outside of Columbus, did not seem like a place where neighbors terrorized each other, yet the anonymous letters targeted multiple residents of the town of 12,000. The attacks on Mary Gillespie seemed to be the most personal. One of them said, "Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing." One letter to Ron read, "Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS. Posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out." Then on an August evening in 1977, a phone rang at the Gillespie house. Ron picked it up. Moments later, Gillespie stormed out of his truck with a .22 caliber revolver in hand. He told his daughter that he was going to confront the Circleville letter writer. After he left, Gillespie's truck slid off the road and rammed into a tree, and Gillespie died at the scene. The local coroner ruled that Gillespie's death was an accident, but an individual named Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law, considered it murder. Before he died, Did Ron Gillespie confront the letter of the Circleville letters? Police determined that Gillespie's gun had been fired exactly once before his death. They never learned why Ron fired his weapon. The Circleville letters continue. Even after Ron Gillespie's death, the Circleville letters continued to arrive, and they continued to target Mary Gillespie, who was now a widow, and they continued to target Gordon Massey, the school superintendent. So if anything, no matter what we say about this, Zodiac related or not, I think this indicates that that wasn't the primary motive. It wasn't only about exposing some type of affair with the superintendent Gordon Massey and Mary Gillespie, because, I mean, if anything, they were trying to draw attention to the husband, Ron Gillespie, and alert him of this, but he died and the letters continue, so it seems like there was a much bigger plan that was involved, with one exception. It could also be something to the effect of this person may have just been trying to expose the school superintendent for their own personal reasons, maybe a vindictive reason, a sabotage, some type of personal revenge, but then they just got addicted to the flair of it, the way that I think the Zodiac Killer got addicted to sending the letters, because the Zodiac Killer murdered 5 people between 1968 and 69, to the best of our knowledge. Now, the Zodiac Killer could have committed more crimes than that, but it seems like the Zodiac was definitely more involved with sending the letters and the ciphers. The Zodiac sent dozens of letters and ciphers and greeting cards and diagrams about his crimes compared to the crimes that he actually committed and to the crimes that he actually admitted to and provided evidence of committing. So I think with the Circleville letter writer, there's something very similar going on. Now, let's keep reading here. One Circleville letter said, "Everyone knows what you have done," the letters taunted. "If you don't believe us, just make them mad and find out for yourself." The attacks grew even more devious. Years after Ron's death in 1983, Mary Gillespie nearly fell into a fatal trap. One February day, Gillespie stopped her bus on the side of the road and someone had put up a handmade sign on a fence, targeting her teenage daughter. Gillespie tried to pull down the sign, but it was tied to a box. After she brought the box home, Gillespie opened it to find a loaded gun inside. And there was a very big explanation about this in the 48 Hours episode when they pretty much said that she tries to pull down the sign and she finds this box and she doesn't try to open it until she's at home, and the box actually has a 25 caliber pistol in there, and it was rigged like a booby trap that was designed to shoot her as she was opening it. But let's keep reading here because it turned out that the gun belonged to a man named Paul Freshour, whom I've already mentioned, and he was Ron Gillespie's brother-in-law. He was married to Gillespie's sister. Ron Gillespie, of course, was the man who died in this possible confrontation with the Circleville letter writer, and Ron Gillespie is also the person who has been mostly either humiliated, or at the very least, the Circleville letter writer was trying to bring the affair to his attention. He or she is trying to alert Ron Gillespie that his wife was having an affair with the school superintendent. But Paul Freshour is the man accused of attempted murder. Paul Freshour's wife, Karen, confessed to the police that her husband had written the Circleville letters. The couple had been in the middle of a contentious divorce, and Karen had evidence she had discovered the letters hidden throughout their belongings. Now, wait a second. Now, some people are going to be like, all right, well, what does this have to do with the Zodiac Killer? Now, how on earth is this Zodiac related? I mean, what does this have to do with anything involving the Bay Area in 1968 and 69, plus the early 1970s, if you have someone with all of this evidence pointing toward him? I mean, well, what's going on? Well, the police arrested Paul Freshour, and he was convicted of attempted murder, and he spent 10 years in prison for this. However, the Circleville letters continued to be mailed while he was in prison, and this is one of the biggest twists in the story. And I was even just sitting back and just watching the episode of 48 Hours and reading the stuff like on ATI, and I was just thinking, now wait a second. This to me sounds like he didn't do it. I mean, if he's incarcerated and behind bars for 10 years, and the letters keep going for years while he was in prison, and to answer one question that some of you might have, there are hundreds and hundreds of Circleville letters, and to the credit of Pat Brown, she brought up one source that stated that there were thousands of Circleville letters, but she didn't find a source that corroborated or supported that. Instead, she's like, there are hundreds of letters that are definitely examined and reported to have either been from the Circleville letter writer or that they are Circleville letters that are considered. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were thousands, because we see this in the Zodiac Killer case, that lots of people are writing communications and letters that are pretending to be the Zodiac. There are unconfirmed communications, which I believe, to the best of my knowledge, are from the Zodiac Killer. And there are also thousands of Jack the Ripper letters, and this is something that is widely reported on. And every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio, Ripper Wednesday. And this is one thing that just gets talked about time and time again, that over 1,000 letters were mailed or sent or shipped in some way of someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper, or at the very least someone who is insinuating that they were Jack the Ripper, and almost all of them were investigated, and only 3 of them are given very strong consideration, but I'll talk more about that on Ripper Wednesday. Now you might be thinking, well, okay, now the story has turned. The story has changed. This guy was sent to prison for attempted murder, even though, it's his gun that was used in the box. But if the letters continue while he was in prison, he didn't do it. He was wrongfully convicted, right? Well, the 48 Hours episode concluded with a handwriting expert looking at some very specific shapes, very unique shapes in the letters, very unique forms of letter writing that were found in Paul Freshour's writings and in the Circleville letter writings. So you're really left with something that is just uncertain. And it says that Paul Freshour ultimately died at the age of 70, but he spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name, saying that he was not the Circleville letter writer. And there really is a divide in the camps. Some people are like, yeah, he totally did it. The handwriting expert on 48 Hours was like, 100% he did it. There are just too many similarities in his handwriting. And then other people are like, no, this guy was set up, he was framed, he was supposed to be the fall guy, and perhaps it worked. But ultimately, this is going to sound a little bit weird. Do I think that the Zodiac Killer wrote the Circleville letters? I mean, ultimately, no, but I think that these remind me so much more of the Freeway Phantom from the early 1970s in the DC area. And I'm just going off of memory. But the Freeway Phantom wrote a letter that said, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, the Freeway Phantom." And there's only one letter that's given very strong consideration as to having come from the Freeway Phantom, and it's the one that was found with the body of Brenda Woodard, the fifth victim of the Freeway Phantom. And I don't think that the Circleville letter writer and the Freeway Phantom are the same person. I just noticed a lot of similarities in the way that the letters were structured, although the Freeway Phantom did have a blend of capitals and lowercase, and the Circleville letter writer seems to have mostly capitals. And I just want to throw in one particular interjection, if you will, about the Freeway Phantom. Somebody wrote into the channel saying that they think there were two killers, that's the explanation. And their reason for this is this letter that is found with Brenda Woodard was most likely written by Brenda herself, because they matched very strong similarities of her own personal handwritings to the letter that was written. And they think that this is one theory, that the killer actually knew her. If the killer knew any of the victims, it was the fifth victim in the Freeway Phantom case, Brenda Woodard, and she was instructed to write the letter, and someone was probably putting this on as a ruse or a joke, and they're saying, "Hey, why don't you write out this letter?" And it was all a murder plan to have her murdered. And the reasons for this is Brenda Woodard was stabbed and the other victims were not. Brenda Woodard was 18 years old. She was the oldest victim. And most importantly, all the other victims had their shoes removed. And Brenda Woodard did not, although she was wearing some very long and high rain boots at the time. And we don't necessarily know, but I think those are all very reasonable observations. And yes, all things Freeway Phantom are Zodiac related, because there is one theory out there that the Freeway Phantom and the Zodiac Killer were the same person, and that suspect who gets accused of both of these crimes is named Jack Torrance. And I absolutely do not think that Jack Torrance was either of these people. But I've talked about that in some other episodes, and I do have a standalone episode about the Freeway Phantom here on Black Box Online Radio, which I invite you to listen to. But right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel with buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and this allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And I also want to point out that Batman66 shared with me this Zodiac Killer patch from the 1970s. Or let me clarify, this Zodiac patch from the 1970s, because really this is just a Zodiac symbol. A symbol with a circle with the cross going through it. And it's not a Zodiac button, but it is a Zodiac patch. And one thing that I think this might not even be a controversial statement, this might be a widely accepted statement, is the Zodiac's choice to use this symbol is something that really added to the mystery. And it added to the mystery in a beneficial way to the killer. And that is that the Zodiac symbol is so simple that people can just project all types of meaning onto it. Oh, it's the scope of a gun, the circle with a cross going through it. Well, that's the crosshairs. But some people are like, they see the Celtic cross, they see the sun cross, and other people think that they're seeing some type of nautical and naval instruments going on. Other people think that they're just seeing like the cycle and circles of life and the actual astrological signs of the zodiac. The simplicity of this symbol really added to the mystery. But thank you to Batman66 for sharing this with me. And our next supporter shout out goes to River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is also a regular and consistent supporter. Thank you so much for everything. I mean, I really cannot thank you enough. And of course, we have CZ Guy joining the ranks of being a regular and consistent supporter of Black Box Online Radio. And I appreciate all of this, and these guys have been supporting the channel for a very, very long time, and it does mean a lot. And anybody who makes a donation on buymeacoffee.com will get their shout-outs on Zodiac Monday. You can also use the super thanks on YouTube and the super chats when I go live. And we are very soon going to see the return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, a segment where I go live and I talk to you guys about anything and everything true crime related. And I really wanted the True Crime Talk Radio in the morning segments to focus on criminology, forensics, and criminal psychology, so then people could throw in whatever types of questions they wanted, talking about the Zodiac Killer, D.B. Cooper, and Jack the Ripper, the primary stories that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio. JonBenet Ramsey is another case that I have to follow closely that comes up a lot, and I'm really hoping that this year we're going to have a lot of good live streams, and they will be returning in March of 2025 to anyone who's listening to this as it's coming out live. And if you're listening to this in the future, feel free to visit some of the episodes of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, hosted by me, Box Ned. Now, last year on the channel, I told you guys that I became a very big listener to Radio Reddit. There is a YouTube channel out there called Radio Reddit that has stories from Reddit that have been put together into presentations. I'm pretty sure they are AI narrated or computer generated voice narrated, but it does sound rather authentic. And there are lots of similar channels out there, but I found that Radio Reddit is the one that's easiest for me to listen to. And they did an episode on people who knew a murderer. Your friend turned into a murderer. And what was the experience that you had? And people who knew a murderer, what was it like? And I would like to talk about some stories that people had and do some comparing and contrasting between these stories and that of the Zodiac Killer. And the first one, well, also, I should just say that the motivation for this is just what I was talking about, criminology, forensics, and criminal psychology, because it goes back to the book Solving Cold Cases by Joe D. Kennedy that talks about one of the ways that you can actually solve a cold case is obtaining the information about the confession from someone, to saying that the killer almost always tells someone. And even think about crimes that go beyond murder, like, say, the Circleville Letters. You even heard that in the ATI article that the man named Paul Freshour allegedly and reportedly confessed to his wife that he was the Circleville letter writer. I'm really 50-50 on that one. I want to believe that he was innocent, and I'm still bothered by the fact that the letters continued while he was in prison. But one of the theories is maybe he had an accomplice. But let's just look at this as a solid statement. The killer almost always tells someone. So let's compare these stories of killers who have been convicted to that of the Zodiac Killer. And people who knew a murderer, what was their experience like? The first one that was shared on this Radio Reddit episode it was the story of a boy who stabbed his classmate with a pen and went on to murder an 8-year-old boy. And the full context of this was that somebody accidentally scratched someone in the 6th grade math class, and that person took a pen and just stabbed him in the chest extremely hard, and the person who was stabbed fought back and stabbed him in the arm with a pencil or something to that effect, but he was really trying to hurt the person. The person who stabbed the kid in the chest was really trying to hurt this person, and they even provided a news article as a source for this, confirming it, that roughly 3, 4, maybe 5 years later, this boy went on to murder an 8-year-old boy. And it was almost just attacking a kid in a vulnerable place. He murdered the kid who was on a bike trail, who was separated from his parents. And this seems like either some type of internalized rage from someone who just reached a breaking point, or it seems like someone who was doing this in a sociopathic, premeditated way. Now, was the Zodiac Killer like either one of those? I think the Zodiac Killer was definitely both. The Zodiac internalized his rage. You'd have to say that. I don't think the Zodiac Killer had any healthy creative outlets for his anger. Right. That's why he went on to become a serial killer. But this concept of dealing with some type of sociopathic and antisocial personality disorder, all of that stuff is possible with the Zodiac Killer. But a lot of people aren't convinced that the Zodiac would actually be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Now, with the boy who stabbed someone in the chest and then years later goes on to murder an 8-year-old boy in a vulnerable place, it seems like that person had homicidal tendencies, and he was just waiting to act on them. And he was just looking for a victim. And it's almost the concept of the crime was planned, but the victims were not pre-chosen. This all comes back to that concept of, well, was one of the victims of the Zodiac Killer an ex-girlfriend? Not really. The evidence is actually kind of pointing in the opposite direction, that the Zodiac Killer was most likely somebody with homicidal tendencies who's waiting to find a victim in a vulnerable place and in a vulnerable location. I am not presenting that as a certifiable fact. That is purely a statement that I think has a high chance of being true. And the second story that was shared on Radio Reddit was a woman who had a husband who was a medical doctor, and he supplied her with pills. After he cut her off and said he was no longer supplying with pills to fuel her addiction, the woman enlisted the help of an accomplice to have the doctor murdered. Now, this is definitely similar to the story of Belle Guinness, who was referred to as Hell's Belle, who was a serial killer that would enlist the help of a male accomplice to have people murdered. Was the Zodiac Killer somebody like this? I think absolutely not, because this is a crime with a solid motive. This is a crime where somebody else is involved with the disposal of the remains, and I'm just not seeing that from the Zodiac Killer. I don't see any solid motive that has been put forth or planned by the Zodiac, and I really just do not think that this fits in at all, because this person has an addiction, and their addiction has been interrupted and is causing a lot of stress and duress, and this person decided to respond in a homicidal way, completely different from the first story, because in the first story you basically have someone who is just dealing with some type of internal psychological issue, and in the second story about the person who got their pills cut off, there is an external issue that is causing some type of agitation, but that's external, not internal. The third story that was shared in this radio Reddit episode was one brother killed another brother over a dispute with a girl. And there's actually a very, very complicated build-up, and humanity never ceases to amaze me and disgust me at the same time. There was a girl. They actually referred to her by name. They called her Sam, which I can guess is for Samantha. And Sam really liked drama, so she started dating somebody who was a pathological liar because she knew that he had lots of drama in his life. And then Sam, in her own drama-filled way, broke up with the first guy and started dating his brother, and as a way to, again, create certain types of drama. And one brother retaliated by murdering his brother. Oh, you're now dating my girlfriend. And to be clear, not stealing his girlfriend, but you're now dating my girlfriend. And he actually strangled him with some type of electrical cord. Once again, they provided a news article about this in the radio Reddit episode. And this is one where it goes back to exactly what somebody was saying in the comment section. They think that the Zodiac Killer was the ex-boyfriend of one of the victims. Well, in the Zodiac Killer mystery, where's the evidence of that? Insufficient evidence. I mean, where is the hard evidence that connects the Zodiac Killer to having any personal relationship with one of the victims? And if anything, that again is to the Zodiac Killer's credit that the Zodiac did not get caught. And I'm not justifying the Zodiac Killer's actions, I'm condemning them. He was a murderous scumbag. But the Zodiac Killer did not get caught because there weren't a lot of personal connections to the victims. Purely my take on the subject, but I think there is absolutely insufficient evidence for that, and the reason why I wanted to bring this example up specifically is, yes, there's a jealousy angle. Yes, there is some type of sexually related angle, but this one was personal. And the Zodiac Killer's crimes at face value and at surface value appear to be impersonal. If there was some type of direct relationship between the Zodiac and Betty Lou Jensen or Darlene Ferrin or Cecilia Shepard, I'm not seeing it. And I've never been convinced of that. The next story that was mentioned on Radio Reddit was from a woman's boyfriend was beating her son. So a family friend murdered the abusive boyfriend. And this, again, I think is really going to be quite different than the activities of the Zodiac Killer, because this is somebody who took the law into their own hands. Again, this is a family friend who murdered the abusive boyfriend. Specifically, the boyfriend was abusing the woman's son, and he just put a stop to that. This person is trying to do the right thing, but they're going about it in a destructive and illegal manner. Was the Zodiac Killer doing something like that? I mean, the Zodiac says very clearly in his letters that he is trying to collect slaves for the afterlife. He wants to die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves. But in all seriousness, I don't think the Zodiac Killer thought that he was doing the right thing. If anything, I think the Zodiac Killer was consciously aware that he was committing murders and that he's doing this for his own selfishness, and he's not taking the law into his own hands. He might be talking about some quotations from the Mikado where people should be punished for flirting, but I don't think the Zodiac Killer genuinely believed that, because that is just so outlandish that you'd have to provide some type of psychological diagnosis that the Zodiac Killer actually believed these delusions for me to accept that. Instead, I think the Zodiac Killer was a selfish jerk who wanted to be a selfish jerk and continue to be a selfish jerk, and that's all there really is to it. That's all there really is for me to see. And the final one was that a boy tortured a parakeet as a kid, the way that murderers often torture animals when they are children, and they go on to develop stronger homicidal tendencies. But a boy tortured a parakeet as a child, and one night he came from home and he didn't like his mother's cooking, so he beat her to death with a hammer, and then he went to a party. So this is a story that rocked a town, and once again everybody was shocked when it happened and when he was ultimately caught. And the points here that I think are very interesting relate to just how this is something that happens time and time again. This is not an isolated incident, because very clearly, even we look at the story of the Menendez brothers about how they murdered their parents and went on some giant spending sprees. And I think this is the exact same thing. And I think it was a long time brewing with this particular story. And what's the guy's name? Is it John Damon? He was the man who murdered his family because he didn't get access to the car and he wanted to go out on a date with a girl. These types of stories happen time and time again. And I think this relates to something that was shared in a different YouTube video. And it was a story from Japan, actually, where a man murdered his own father. And what he said was that normally, when you are mad at someone, you hit the brakes, metaphorically speaking. You hit the brakes within your own mind. But then, the time that that man murdered his father, and he was about 59 years old, and I think the father was 88, but don't quote me on that. But the son was in his 50s, and his father was considerably older, of course. And he just said that the time that he murdered his father, he didn't hit the brakes. He hit the accelerator. Again, metaphorically speaking, he hit the accelerator and just didn't hold back. And I think that would be true of the John Damon story. I think that would be true of this boy who came home and just murdered his mother because he didn't like the food for dinner. With the Zodiac Killer, was it like that? Absolutely. I think so. Again, not stating it as a certifiable fact, stating it as what I think happened. With the Lake Herman Road murders, if that was the Zodiac Killer's first crime, which I believe it was, as of now, I'm always open to new evidence, but the Zodiac Killer is driving down Lake Herman Road, and he either was triggered by something, he did it spur of the moment, or he knew that he was going to go out and commit a murder, and he is not holding back. Something set him off either that night or in the preceding days, and then he's just like, I'm going to do this, and he's not holding back, and he's perhaps even somewhat blank and expressionless, and just thinking, I'm going to commit this murder because I deserve this, not because it's the right thing to do. Like that example of the person who murdered the abusive boyfriend. No, not because it's done in the name of some type of justice. It's done in his own self-serving name. It's done in the desire to create a murderous persona so he can go on to become the Zodiac Killer. That's ultimately what I think happened. But I would love to know your responses to any of those things there, and I'd love to know your responses to any of the challenge questions that have been made available. You can also visit the channel New Cokes 2024, which is hosted by Vincent McConnell, for lots of Zodiac-related content. You can also go over to the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belchique, which is run by Jérôme Hulot from Belgium, and he has lots of Zodiac Killer discussions, the panel discussion show that's available on his YouTube channel, and of course the Zodcast, hosted by Drew Beeson. Lots of Zodiac-related content that is available online, and feel free to visit some of the Facebook groups, such as the Zodiac Killer Library. I'm an admin in one of those. There's also the Zodiac Killer and Me, run by Jeff Thornton and Melissa Rose Tappa. The Search for the Zodiac, run by Chad Burke. Lots of places online to find Zodiac-related content, and you can find a write-up for the show available at zodiackillercode.com. The production notes are available at zodiackillercode.com. One more time, I am your host, Black Box Ned, and you can always get the show for free online at Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can use the apps to download this program for free in the podcast version under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. You can also keep in touch on Facebook. There's a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, and also my personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. There's also Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram and Black Box Ned 88 on TikTok, and that will be all for me now. Goodbye.